sitting next to
pitcher of water.
Yeah. It's kind of wonderful, actually. I'm also, on my other side, there's a man, and his name is James Murphy, but you may know him as the head of LCD Soundsystem, DFA Records, and other assorted things. Please welcome him.
Thanks.
In lieu of doing a sort of normal career-spanning interview, I thought it might be interesting to play some of your favorite songs and have you
just
talk
in their
about
entirety
them.
And not say anything. Just
there's going to be no
just
talking
play the whole thing
whatsoever.
and we'll just sit here and look at them in an awkward.
Yeah, that's going to be super awkward.
And in film, you just delete. When you watch the video, you can just take the music out, and it'll just look like we're just all
just a lot of us
sitting in silence.
Why don't we start with Yes, Heart of the Sunrise?
Sure.
Is there a portion of this song that I should be...
It's actually, luckily, it's the very beginning. I mean, you want to just jump in and play some songs, I'm with you. It's going to be loud, be careful. I just, there's no reason to scare people first thing in the morning. We're murmuring. If you want to be a real nerd, you can go online and watch people play the drum parts with headphones on electronic pads. To that on YouTube, there's a lot of drummers who do that. They show themselves in their closets with headphones on, playing the beginning of that with along to the song.
Were you doing that with guitar when you started out?
No, I could never play any Yes guitar because it's really complicated. But we did, the band did play that beginning chunk of this at the end of one of the sets of our last show, which caused the people who made the film of our last show to have a heart attack because they didn't know that we did that because we didn't think about it. We just played what we played. And then afterwards they had to make a movie, and then they had to call the singer from Yes and get permission, which is even more complicated because we changed it. We did that a lot. There's little bits of songs live that we never thought twice about because we just did it. And then when you make a film about it, it becomes a licensing curiosity.
You were playing the Twin Peaks theme as well, right?
Yeah, that made them really happy too. Luckily, we didn't also play New York by Jay-Z, which is what we had been doing. Just sort of people would just launch into things in between songs, sort of. It's jazz, man.
I don't think people would necessarily immediately connect you with Yes.
Well, no.
Good one.
I didn't mean that one, but I said it, and I was like, I'll let it hang there on the rim and see if it goes in. But I grew up, I'm a little older, and I grew up, Yes was one of my brother's favorite bands. He's 10 years older than me, so therefore, de facto, my cool 10-year older than me brother's favorite band became one of my favorite bands. And I still have a Yes section of vinyl about this big. And I've been working on, I've actually been working on making a mixtape of beats from Yes to try and give to various rappers, because I also think there's great beats in there. But I guess it's funny because it's music that's it's at times really considered not cool by some people, and it's but it's really loved by other people. But we have Yes parties sometimes at my house. People come over and we'll just eat food, and I'll just play nothing but Yes all day. And if you just listen to it, when you listen to it out of nowhere, it's dude, what are you listening to? This is crazy. Nothing ever sits in one time signature. But after a while, when you get into the mode of it, it's pretty awesome. Full disclosure, he found things to play, and then that was just the first thing.
But I guess I wanted to use it as a idea to talk about kind of technique and style, because I think obviously technique is what they're all about. but I don't know if that's exactly so important to you in what you've done.
Well, with them, it's, you know, it's like if you watch, you might want to make a Dogma movie, but if you watch Kubrick movies, you have to talk about classic cinematography. So it's like, yes, I'm not necessarily in my own band that as obsessed with technique as Bill Bruford, because I don't think anybody is as Bill Bruford's the drummer of that band. If you ever want to watch a really weird video, he made a VHS in the, I think 1980, that's like Inside the Beat or something. It's like just him hitting wood blocks and looking really serious with like video effects, like a la like early, like it would look like in 1980, around the time when he was, I guess, with King Crimson. But yeah, of course that's what we're talking about. But no, it was a big part of my life. I love how strivey and weird it is, and like strivey. I made up a verb. You know, it's like I made up a word. It's strive. It's got strive all over it. It's covered in strive. It's steeped in strive. Well, because they were not as technical when they started off. They were not that technical, and they got really technical because it seemed like the thing to do, which I find really funny.
Let's play a track from your early life. I think there's a story attached to this around Halloween.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of making beats and getting sued.
Wait a little while from now, if I'm not feeling any less sound,
This got
I
sampled
promise
and
myself
sued, I
to
think.
treat myself and visit a nearby tower. And climbing to the top, will throw myself up in an effort to make clear to everyone it's like when you're shattered, left standing in the lurch at a church where people were saying, my God, that's tough. She stood him up. No point in us remaining. We may as well go on as I did on my own, alone again, naturally.
So this is one of the first records you bought.
This is one of the two first 7 inches I bought was Gilbert O'Sullivan's Alone Again Naturally and Fame by David Bowie. And I've said before that the joke is that my life has been an argument between those two things ever since. No, this was like, there's that whole thing in the 70s, like there was all that soft rock with like Bread and stuff that was like more about getting laid. But then there was like all this really incredibly sad, like that song, I said, What a Lonely Boy. Do you know the song? Oh, What a Lonely Boy? About a kid who's an only child and then his parents have another kid. And then he's like, I thought, when you said I was your only son, I thought I was the only one. He's like angry at his parents for having another child, which kind of sums up a big segment of the 70s mentality of really feeling bad for yourself about shit that was just normal and fine. And this is Alone Again Naturally. And I remember really, I had very serious parents. And one Halloween, I was so much younger than my siblings that I had to do things all by myself, whereas they always had each other kind of. I was a Catholic surprise, I think. Like, oh, I guess we're having a kid. And so I had, my father was late from a meeting and I sat dressed as Darth Vader in my room, like crying and listening to this song over and over and over until he finally came home. My mother was like, I'm not even gonna go up and look at him. You have to go get him and take him trick-or-treating because I won't even look at him because this is infuriating.
Did you have the mask on?
I had the mask on. I may have had the mask up at times,
Okay.
but I think when he came in, I did there's like tears running under the like clearly carcinogen plastic mask right down my face. I was 8. So yeah, that was a really cool thing to deal with as a parent, I'm sure.
So why don't we play?
I think you have to wonder whether you want to give, as a parent, you'd wonder if you want to give the child a hug or just beat them. Like just beat them mercilessly to show them what a bad day is like.
Let's play the other
Talking
song
about myself, so
that you're
nobody
having the
me
argument
being
about.
beaten would have been okay. What?
Let's play the other song that you're having the argument about.
And there's no graceful way to stop things like that, I think. Unless pressing... I recently met David Bowie, which was probably one of the most meetings that I've had. It was at Electric Ladyland, which is where he recorded that, in the basement of Electric Ladyland. His vocal, where he does the diving, where it just dives and dives and fame, really scared me as a kid. I was 8, and David Bowie really scared me. My brother had David Live, which had a cover of him looking like all angular and like super pale and skinny and creepy. And I remember being like, my brother, like, "What's that?" And he's like, "You know about punk rock?" It was 1977, so it was current, and I was 7. And I was like, "Yeah, man." I have no idea. He's like, "That's the first punk rocker, man." And my brother was not into punk rock. He was into David Bowie. Therefore, I was into David Bowie.
But he was right.
He was, well, one of the first, yes. But I was very obsessed with David Bowie kind of all my life. No matter what I was listening to, he kind of always was current. But meeting him was pretty amazing. He's very sweet, actually. Very nice man.
What did you guys talk about?
Recording of Fame downstairs at Electric Ladyland to a certain degree. I did my best not to ask too many questions. Like, because I could hear my mouth open, feel my mouth opening, and I could hear what I was going to say, and I could, luckily, the little empathy monster would float out of my head and land in what I imagined to be his head while I was saying things like, the snare sound on low, on the third, I was like, okay, I don't want to go down this road, because it's just where I would go, and so I didn't do any of that. I just said stuff like, yeah. No, I know, yeah. And tried to stay out of the way.
Is there anyone else that would put you in that state, do you think, these days?
Lou Reed would put me in that state. I think Lou Reed would put people who don't know who Lou Reed is in that state, though. So,
why don't we play a track from an album that you quite like?
I think this is something people... Well, this actually, I'll play it and talk. It was for me, this is really interesting because this was a time when I was
This is the Violent Femmes, by the way.
Yeah. And there's a lot of songs on this record that I like more.
I went for the easy one.
Yeah, you went for the easy one.
I apologize.
But when I was a kid, this record, every year you hit an age where this became your record. It came out a certain year. I'm going to say, what, in 84, 83 or 84 maybe 83. But you found this record, kids found this record every year. Like, it didn't matter. Like, the Dead Kennedys and the Violent Femmes and the Clash, you hit an age where those became your record. It didn't matter that it was 8 years old or if it was 6 years old or 12 years old. It was just like, it was one of those rites of passage albums that I guess sounded like being a suburban kid who would get himself punched in the face just by being annoying and feel outside. It just sounded like being that age to me.
Were you a suburban kid that got punched in the face?
Well, I'm the same size I was when I was about 15, so I didn't get punched in the face that much. So I was like, yeah. So I was a big kid, so I didn't get beat up too much. But most of my friends were the suburban kids who mouthed off and got punched in the face. But no, I miss this. The length that records hung out. This to me was a time when records really hung out. I feel it's funny now. I think the Smiths is one of those bands now that once they kind of came back into people's consciousness, I'm going to say 2003, 2002, because they were for the late 90s. You didn't say you liked the Smiths. People don't remember that because everyone's like, "Oh, of course they're cool." No, but they weren't. You didn't go for it. But they now that they come back, I think people hit an age and then a certain type of kid just finds the Smiths, and that's part of their rite of passage. And kind of the way metal's always worked like that for me. Like there's a certain age, there's a certain type of kid who just finds, early like Black Sabbath, and then there's James Brown and Funkadelic. There's only some music that just at a certain age you just find the meters and they become your band for a while. And I do hope that people are making music that becomes that going forward, that like has its moment in time, but also becomes that thing that people can self-identify. It translates enough that in the future people can find it again.
Was that kind of a secret aim of the band, LCD Soundsystem, in a way, to make music that is gonna, people can find it down the road?
Well, I think indirectly, because I think for me, I hated bands that didn't meet me as I grew up. I hated it when I kind of still, I can go back and listen to things, but I didn't like it when you liked something and then you felt later on you got a little smarter. You were like, oh, this is bullshit. I was totally suckered in by this. I was completely betrayed. This sucks. Damn it. But there were always people.
What bands were like that for you?
I have met too many people to say what bands were like that, because I'll just say it off the cuff now. I'll be like, oh, that band sucks. And then I'll just be on a plane. There'll be some guy glaring at me. And then I heard what you said. Sorry. Didn't know that you had terrible tragedies in your band and your best friend killed himself, and I'm sorry. It happens. But so I kind of liked things that met you as you changed your taste and you changed and grew up. And I think David Bowie's good at that. I think the Smiths are really good at that. Like when you're a kid and you're like, this music's so sad. And then you get older and you're like, this music is hilarious. Like I just didn't know it was hilarious when I was a kid because it just seemed so sad. Now I realize he's really funny. Like it just, would keep refining you and refining you. I remember the first time when I was a kid and I heard when Public Enemy came out and I was like, it was so incredibly aggressive. Didn't sound like anything else. It was really scary. But I can put Public Enemy on now and I'm like, I love this song. It's funny. It's great. It's warm. Like it keeps growing and changing with me rather than being like, oh, that was funny, but it kind of sucks now. And so that for me with the band I was always trying to make it so that if you scrape through a layer, there was hopefully another layer that was interesting behind it rather than, I'm going to make a really weird reference. When I was a kid, I really liked The Lord of the Rings. I read those books every year from when I was 6 on, like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, all through those formative years of being a total nerd. And I hated other fantasy books because they always seemed really transparent. Like you'd be like, that guy's name sounds like a dumb word. I hate this. And the Lord of the Rings books always sounded like there was something behind them. Like if you poked through, there was another layer and another story. And so I don't think I consciously tried to think of the band in the terms of the fictional fantasy work of J.R.R. Tolkien, but I do like to not feel like you're pulling a fast one on people, and that if they see through that first layer, there's nothing there. Which is why whenever there was a direct influence in something, I never hit it. I never wanted a song to be based on like ripping something off from some band that you like, and then later on you're like, oh, that sucks, that's a copy. I'm like, no, it's a copy. I'm telling you right out of the gate, really loudly. And it's not my fault if you've never heard that song before, but your friend is going to be like, dude, that's a copy of that. It's fine. Like, I want you to know that now so that we can then get on with the rest of what's happening.
Let's play Can, maybe?
I feel like I'm rambling, but yeah.
No.
What are you going to play?
My home, looking for the chick to speak. Just like in my home, smiling face like those lights becoming romantic. Those lights making home. Those lights making on my head. Those lights.
Do you remember when you first ran into them?
When I first heard Can?
Yeah.
I'm a little torn as to when it happened, but pretty young, and I would have been through one of two things. an interview with John Lydon, and an interview with Mark E. Smith of The Fall. Both of them were big Can fans. And so I couldn't Google Can. Also, just Googling Can, not that effective. It's a pretty common word. Try being the, you know what I mean? You're kind of screwed yourself for being searched on the internet. Chick, also. Well, people didn't think of that at the time.
Yeah, I think every band should be thinking about that nowadays.
Exactly, at all times.
When they start out.
Are we searchable? But Can was not searchable at the time, with the lack of internet. And it was hard to find the music. So a lot of things would be like a tape off the college radio station, or I sometimes DJ'd at a college radio station when I was like 16, 17. So I could go in and make cassettes, and you couldn't tell anybody because technically you weren't allowed to do that because home taping was killing music.
Well, how did you get this job at college radio at 16, 17?
My friends, a lot of my friends were older than me, and one of them had a radio station called the Youth Brigade, radio show called the Youth Brigade on Trenton State Radio. So I would just go in with them and hang out and feel cool.
So I guess that was where you were getting the crazy bands and getting deeper and deeper into stuff. Quite early.
Just the Princeton Record Exchange was a record store near where I grew up. I grew up in a town just outside of Princeton, which is a not nearly as nice town, called Princeton Junction, which is now like kind of seems like Princeton, but at the time it was the town named after the nice town, which is kind of didn't feel so great. But the Princeton Record Exchange was this amazing record store that started off as a classical and jazz collector's store, and they had a tiny little front office on the main street in Princeton, and then in the back a big warehouse with like really rare pressings of classical and jazz, and for collectors, proper collectors. And they would send out this blue mimeograph, the purple mimeographed lists to Japan, and people would send in orders and buy them. And when people were traveling to New York, if they were real record nerds, they'd get on a train and come down to Princeton and go to the record exchange and collect. There'd be people buying like 150 records at once of they're very expensive. And that was the record store. But in the very front, there were these kids who seemed like these, very adult, wise grown men working in the front, who I think were probably like 19, who were at the university or DJing at the station, and they started buying punk rock records for crates in the front. So this record store had avant-garde, classical and jazz, collectible, beautiful vinyl in the back, like operas, and punk rock. There was no middle. Like you couldn't get a Bruce Springsteen record in there. Like you couldn't. It wasn't their business. And it was only because the clerks were like listening to weird records that you'd get like Dvorak and like the surf punks. Like that's all you could get.
Were you ever going back further into that jazz and classical back then?
Nope.
And I guess there was no crossover between
there
those
wasn't
audiences.
really. Yeah, there wasn't that many crossover artists or
even buyers.
Yeah. Although I was in a choir as a youth. So I sang classical music through high school and was very into that, like opera and classical music style stuff. But it was about as relevant as playing a sport. Like it felt completely unrelated as a thing to me.
Why don't we play another tune? You started out playing guitar, right?
Yes. I was a guitarist.
There's a
terrible
particular track that you always seem to mention, the guitar playing.
Oh, yeah.
Should we go further?
It's later.
Snapper, snapping.
It's the very end. Some of the toughest guitar playing in the world.
Taking
that is actually one of the most influential guitar parts to me in my life.
Really?
Yes.
Why?
Well, because when later on I got into like Gang of Four and stuff like that, and I forgot about the B-52s. B-52s were hugely important to me as a kid, and they were part of what defined punk rock for me as a kid. I didn't have a lot of friends who were like punk rock kids. We didn't have like a bunch of kids with skinheads, and it was just like weird kids, you know. Like it's just like it was totally normal to listen to music that in other towns. Like I would tell kids later when I moved to New York, I'd be like, "Oh yeah, I really like Sisters of Mercy and B-52s," and they'd be like, "What? You don't like just every band from DC on Discord?" I'm like, "No, never really got that stuff." It's like, you don't get that stuff at all. No, just like the Clash and maybe like Nitzareb and you know, like just like weird unrelated bands that didn't seem. And so part of what defined punk rock for me was outsiderness, and the B-52s were like this incredibly camp, like Southern gay rock band with a guitar player who had 4 strings. And played so, I mean, to me, that's just like really physical and visceral playing. And sometimes you'll forget that because you'll hear it's funny. And, you know, like you just forget that they were like a really awesome band with a really great guitar player. And so that constellation of punk rock to me was always this kind of like outsiderness. And when I first saw large group scene punk rock, I was completely repelled by it. Because I was like, there are way too many of you people who agree with one another in this room for this to feel like punk rock to me. It looks like a football game. Like it was just like dudes that dressed the same, that totally agreed with the singer who was yelling aggressive stuff to a bunch of people who already agreed with him. So it's just meaningless to me. Like, whereas like Suicide to me was awesome. They were like, everybody hated them. People threw stuff at them. And they all were like, now they're like, oh, I loved Suicide. It's like, no, you didn't. Because they know the name of every person who liked them when they started.
Yeah.
My other project is I desperately want to recreate the early Public Enemy catalog with Fred Schneider. It sounds funny, but if you think about early Chuck and early Fred, think bass, How Low Can You Go, Death Row, Would a Brother Know by Fred. It's really easy to see. I think their voices have this weird roundness to them that I think is kind of more similar than one would think.
You mentioned the physicality.
I don't think that's going to happen, so I can just say it. So
Yeah.
I don't see that happening soon.
You mentioned the physicality of the playing, and I think that's why you've said you almost gave up the guitar, because when you saw the drums, you felt like that was an easier way to kind of.
Well, I also saw a good
Get that.
guitar player. I played guitar in a band with a really good guitar player named Bill Yokiyama, or Yutaka Yokiyama.
He could play Yes songs.
He was a classical violinist and a totally smart, interesting, creative guy. And we really bonded over like Captain Beefheart and Pill and Sly Stone. It was kind of an obsession with like James Brown, Sly Stone, all these like really simple, like James Brown guitar playing is some of my favorite guitar playing because it plays in that world where there's a guy whose job is to go dump dun and if he fucks with that at all, James Brown's like, and it's like, that's $50. It's like, and I mean,
It's a tough one to aspire to in a way.
It's amazing to aspire to because it's like,
yeah.
you know, shut up and do that. Like that rules. You do that well, and if you can't do that, you can't do that. Like you can't, and that's a big part of when we started our band. Like I'm like a pretty primitive player of everything. But I'm obsessed with that kind of physicality and with it being everything snapping a certain way, quite on top, which is kind of counter to how a lot of rock is. And so people would join our band and like, to play live, I was a nightmare. Like rehearsals for the first month or two would be playing a groove from a song for a day. And just until everything felt like it was clicking. It's all easy music to play, but it's really hard music to play well. And I think people, when you listen to it, you don't know. Very few people are like, guitar player puts too much weight on his upstrokes. And it's making it feel backwards. Or that guy's a little sloppy, doesn't do thirds well. Like people very seldom feel that. But when it's right, and like I mean, the JBs are kind of like the best at that, that sense of top feel rather than behind feel. And that's a feel that's gone because everyone got really into behind the beat. Everyone got really excited about like that idea of funk where the beat is behind the one, like it's a little late and it's a little like heavy. But like James Brown stuff is like it just sits like it's like clockwork. It's like, or the meters is like clockwork where things are right on top, and I really like that. And it's what I liked about like certain. Like James Chance, it's what I liked about like a lot of no wave was that stuff was kind of clicky and on top, and the B-52s did it quite well. I brought it back to B-52s. It wasn't.
Yeah, it's
called the callback.
Let's play. Speaking of kind of sounds of the band and the label itself, let's play a track that you mentioned is kind of influential on the snare sound of DFA. I could let that play on for the rest of we could just listen to that and be fine. That was metro area atmospheric.
Atmospheric, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Metro areas and Morgan Geist when he did his solo stuff at that time. Metro areas, this guy Morgan Geist and Darshan Jazrani, and they were New Yorkers, and I didn't know them from a New Yorker. I found about them through a London guy, Paul Mogg, who was in the Psychonauts. And Tim and I at DFA were working on like these kind of disco sounds and these kind of synth basses and claps, and people were kind of thinking we were out of our minds. And
why?
Because history's funny. It sounded like a terrible idea, and we knew it was a terrible idea. We laughed. We'd be like, we loved it, but we knew what it sounded like when we were like saying like. I remember Paul Mogg was one of the guys we were talking back and forth, and he was like, I want to make like Human League and disco. And we were just we were like, yes, that's kind of what we want to do. And like, you know, but it's a nightmare to try and explain to people that because they just laugh at you. But Morgan and Darshan were killing it. Like this was I heard this and lost my mind because it was really like that, like, Is It All Over My Face, the Arthur Russell sound. And I had just made this song Beat Connection, which sat on the shelf for a year and a half. And it had that similar kind of closed disco drum sound, no ambience, not a ton of low end, sort of like this kind of punctuated tactile hi-hat sound that I always really liked. But they worked with space in a different way, which I thought was always really beautiful. There was like a really gentle space to all of the early Metro area singles. And you can get them combined in an album. And they were an absolute revelation at the time. Like you could play them, they sounded so gentle, and then you go out and play them and they're massive. Like they pound and they just kill dance floors. And I feel stupid now because I wish I should have played like Mira or something the other night. Just because they sound incredible, and they'd come on and you'd be like, this party has got so much better. And it's, even though it's like kind of cerebral feeling in a way and melancholy in a way, it's still like those guys are proper dance music dudes who just made floor killers, but they sounded like something else too.
There was a moment in the film, the DFA documentary that just came out, the drummer is talking about putting mouse pads on. Oh no, that's
Matt Thornley, who's not the drummer. Yeah, Matt who works in the studio. Where we cut up neoprene, the really heavy rubbery ones, not like those floaty foamy mouse pads, but the ones that like go and kind of stick and feel like a wetsuit. We cut those like kind of jelly mouse pads and we put them on the toms like little squares of them.
Where did you like come up with that sort of idea that was exactly the material?
When I was really young in my first band, which was called Great, so that we could go on stage and say, hi, we're great. And it also, we changed it to the Mystery Meets at some point. I don't remember when that was. And on the power of this successful ensemble in 8th grade, I was able to play with older kids in 9th grade. And there was a guy named Arthur Owens who was the drummer, and he was really into Gang of Four. And he had this drum set that he'd like, I never changed the heads, man. I've never changed them. And they were the deadest. It sounded like he was playing cardboard boxes, but it sounded so tough to me. It was like this really tough sound. So I've always done that. Like when I recorded a record in like 86 or 87 in a real studio, I saved up, I was a roofer in the summer and spring. I worked like everyone would go to the beach, and I would climb scaffolding with roof slates because I was dumb and unskilled, but could totally climb ladders and scaffolding carrying heavy things because I was a big kid. So I would just make as much money as I could and try and buy equipment. And I finally saved enough money to go to a studio. And they had this really fancy drum set. And like, I'm sure it wasn't that fancy, but to me it seemed like, like a Lamborghini of drum sets. I'm sure it was just some Tama off the shelf drum set but it was to us, we were like, well, check this out, man, this drum set's crazy. But my drummer hit it and it was like boom, boom, boom. And we were just like, so we took all the bottom heads off of the drums, which the guy that ran the studio was just horrified. And then we just found stuff to tape to it. So we're just this like 4 of us idiots like taping all this stuff, but they did sound tough. And it's just been part of what I do all the time. In the 90s, I got into like really resonant drums, really natural drums, because I started learning from like Steve Albini and Bob Weston how to record. And so I learned how to like record these resonant drums. But after kind of the 90s, I just remembered what it was like. And I saw a video of Jackie Liebzeit from Can, the drummer from Can, playing with no bottom heads. And then I started looking at all these photographs, and I was like, all these drummers, like Bonham, like they just didn't have bottom heads. They just had top heads. And so I started experimenting. I was like, well, what if we just get rid of them? We go back to what I did when I was a kid, top heads with little mutes on them. And if you tune them right, they just turn into these like, turning the decay down on an 808 or a 909, and they have like a little, rather than like all this ringing extra tonal information. And then start listening to James Brown again. There's no ring. Start listening to Sly Stone. There's no ring. Like listen to In Time, the snare drum by Sly Stone, a song called In Time. Some of the best drumming ever. The snare turnarounds are like, I can't do it. Like I've tried and I can't get my head around the turnarounds. And the snare drum is just like popcorn. It's just like this really short crack. And I think In Time's the wallet. So I started reading about Motown and a lot of people putting the wallets on the snares, but the wallet always would buzz. It would allow a buzz through because the wallet would leap when you hit it. So it'd be like bzz, and shut down. So we started taping the neoprene because it felt like a dead enough material, and you could make smaller and bigger pieces of it and kind of slide it around in the kit to find out where the nodes that you didn't like were. So it's a long story for how to make things go.
This is Heaven 17.
Have you heard it on the news about this fascist groove thing? Evil men with racist views spreading all across the land. Don't just sit there on your ass and look that funky chain dance. Brother, sister, shoot your best. We don't need this fascist groove thing. Brothers, sisters, we don't need that fascist groove thing.
So the singer on that is, if you listen to the song Sound of Silver, on LCD Soundsystem album, very similar.
Yeah,
in a way.
That was on purpose for the Heaven 17 stroke. More Heaven 17 than Human League. That kind of voice that went away I started thinking about the way people sang, and I was like, they sing totally differently, and it's not their natural voice box. It's just like what's expected of a singer. And there was that period in the 80s where people always sang like that. And I really loved it. It's like it was a part of what, you know, you'd have a guy that's like, oh, hey, how's it going? Are you going to sing a song? Cool. And they suddenly turn into this other person. I'm sort of like, you know, if you ever want to test that theory, like listen to a female, like a vocalist who sing, like listen to Nina Simone, and listen to like early Roberta Flack, and then listen to like a modern singer, and the way they use their voice is like just radically different. It's what's expected in terms of how many notes per second is radically different. And so anyway, I was very obsessed with this type of singing as a kid. And since the song is about a certain nostalgia of, for me being at that age at that time, I thought I would sing in that mode. And everyone, again, my friends always have a mixture of like, well, that's cool, or no, that's terrible, you can't do that. And that one was, you know, given the music I felt was very strong in that song, so I got away with, like, my friends were like, I really like the music. Singing is a little weird, but it seemed okay. But that's actually a song also, that Sound of Silver is a song of, that's the most careful Tom recording I've ever done. That's like me trying to make Tom sound like a 909. Live toms, so they're not drum machines, they're live. Sorry.
No.
Nerd stuff.
The singing, though, I think is interesting. Yeah, exactly. Let's nerd out. The singing, you hadn't done any singing before you started LCD Soundsystem, is that right?
No, that's not true. I was the singing guitar player. Okay. Which is another word for saying I was a terrible egomaniac jerk as a youth. I was the singing guitar player. It had been a
long time, though.
Yes, and I stopped. I became a drumming engineer, which was sort of like this weird self-imposed penance, I guess, for making terrible music in my childhood. And also for being like, I'm awesome. Things are going to work out so great for me. So I don't need to go to college or really take anything seriously. It's just a matter of time. And then I was like, oh, it really is a matter of time in a totally different way. So my first life as a singing guitar player ended in tears, and started with my 22-year-old life of being a drumming engineer, which ended in quitting, which started with my early 30s life of going like, okay, just get your head out of your ass, and you know, you don't have a college degree and you don't really have much of a good job because you make music, and yet you're not making music. So
you said for a long time, though, that the fact that it took you so long was probably the most helpful.
It was the best thing that ever happened to me. Well, it's one of the best things that ever happened to me, for sure. Because I don't think I would have been a very happy person if I had been successful when I was young. I know a lot of people who were successful when they were young, and some of them are happy and some of them are really, really not happy. I think it's hard. I think life is really hard. I think happiness is really hard. Satisfaction is really hard. And if you get all the things that you're supposed to look forward to and that make you feel great really early, you might not work out a lot of other stuff. You might not work out some things that are a little more, you know, maybe a little more fundamental than having people like you. And that's why you meet like crazy musicians. Musicians aren't crazy because crazy people make music. Musicians are often crazy because making music makes you crazy. And certainly being very successful at it can make you totally crazy. And I met so many people that like just have these far away, like, oh, the guy's really successful. Oh, he's fucking crazy. There's just eyes that are just a million miles away. Like they're still carrying on a grudge from some other. Yeah, I remember in '96 in that other band, Pearl Jam said we sucked, so I fucked those guys. I was like, didn't you just buy an island? Relax. So, you know, I feel like it makes people crazy because you aren't suddenly happy. And so I think people look at like, well, if I'm not happy, something must be wrong. So you start finding problems when there really aren't any. Whereas if you just learn that you're not happy and that's part of being a human, and then you just appreciate it when good things happen to you and you can enjoy them and laugh at them. I think I've been lucky enough to have kind of worked out a bunch of that stuff before getting the great niceness of having people like the thing that I do. So now I can enjoy it and have some perspective on it. Like it's not something I deserve. It's not something that like, where's the guy that's supposed to tell me I'm awesome and give me a bunch of money? Where's that guy? And I was a kid, like if somebody had done that when I was a kid and then like when I was 24, they weren't doing it anymore, I would just be so angry. I would like be the worst guy. Yeah, maybe not.
You mentioned Roberta Flack.
Yes.
Why don't we play a song by her?
It's a little sacrilegious to stop that, but I'll let it go again because I wanted to mention something about her singing in this while you're listening. This is somebody with an incredibly powerful voice, under singing so hard that when she opens up a tiny bit on the higher notes, I remember as a kid just getting all the goosebumps and the hair standing up the back of the neck because this is like somebody with an army, like someone with an army of a voice, just kind of like giving you a bit of a look. And it's so I think it's incredibly powerful. So I'll put it back on. Sorry. Just takes her a second to get to it.
The first time ever I saw your face, I thought the sun rose in your eyes, and the moon and the stars were the gifts you gave to the dark and the endless skies, my love.
It's a relatively sacrilegious song to fade out.
Yeah, I realized this. I started playing and I was like,
you
might be here for the entire thing. I guess I wanted to ask about the power of restraint with that one. I mean, it's tough to hold back.
It's a lost art at the moment, especially with singers who feel like they have to be gymnasts, and I find it exhausting. Especially now our ears are so trained for auto-tuning that even people who are really skilled singers are auto-tune. I don't know. I have no like religious problem with auto-tune as a tool for. There are people who use it really interestingly.
Like who?
Well, I think Daft Punk used it really interesting. I think Kanye's used it really interestingly. I think, but when it's used to sanitize something, we all get super addicted to everything sounding like an ELO record. I like ELO. But ELO was different because very few people could layer vocals that way and very few people could like hyper-tune. Very few people were that nerdy. But now it's just like everybody can be that. So you just everything becomes quite tonally sanitized. And we're not used to quarter tones. We're not used to people moving around the note very much. We're instead used to like explosive, like unedited, somebody just doing a bunch of gymnastics and you can edit it into, which again, it's not like I don't have no thing against that. I just think that there's rooms. I wish there was more room for this. I think Adele was really interesting because I feel like she sings with a certain sense of restraint sometimes. But a lot of people who want to pat themselves in the back for being awesome singers need to sit down. Sometimes I think would do well to sit down and listen to something like this, or listen to Who Knows Where the Time Goes by Nina Simone. Songs that just like are held back in such a way. Like she shows when she goes those felt the earth part, it just like opens a tiny bit, and it's just like whoa, it's like steering a very big boat, and everything just kind of goes to one side. I love that. I think that's one of the best sounding songs of all time. And she's the piano player too. That's the other people that she was a piano player, like similar to Nina Simone. She was a great piano player before she became a singer. And last night I did play a Roberta Flack song, but I played Ooh Ee Ah Ah, the Steve Hurley mix, which is a house song that late Roberta Flack. I love Roberta.
Let's go in a completely different direction.
Right, man.
Were no good for making carbon in its light. Then giant stars first
Separated. Disfigured. Maladies. Tedious.
I was going to wait till it went to the change, but it takes a long time.
That was the fall
Paintwork. Yeah.
I guess I played it for that
part.
Moment.
Yeah. When I first bought, I was a big Fall fan. And when I first found this record, I was listening to a lot of like what one would call new wave, which was pretty sanitized to a certain degree, most of it, a lot of it, especially the radio new wave, like what had been. And then the Fall came around and I heard it and I was just sitting in my room listening to that and I was just like, who sits in a room, a control room of a professional studio, does that, and then goes, yep,
We got it.
print. That's mixed. So I guess we send this over to the mastering lab. Like, it's just so unconcerned with everything I listened to was concerned with. But really, the whole record is like this. It's This Nation's Saving Grace, which is like 85. It's a Brick Smith era Fall, which is one of my favorite eras. I mean, they have like, I think something like 60 albums.
No joke there.
With only one continuous member, which is the singer, Mark Smith, who's just talking in the background. And he has a tape recorder that he'll just tape stuff and just talk into it and then replace the song with the stuff that he's talking into. A tape recorder or something with the TV, where there's just the organ in the background. I think he would do that in the control room sometimes. I guess the music would play and he would just record stuff when they were soloing things and try to fit it back into the song.
Where can we hear moments or like that influence on LCD?
I don't think I ever got my head around that. I think I tried not to be a perfectionist. I tried to leave a lot of stuff in, but I think that's a singular. I think you hear as many moments of that as you hear me singing like Roberta Flack, which is like, that's not me. And it's a thing that always reminded me to take more chances, and a thing that always reminded me to relax. And I think I took chances in just in exposing myself or embarrassing myself, rather than that kind of totally. Like, it's like abstract painting, it's like, it's a lot more abstract than I would usually let myself do, because I felt like that would feel so far away from me that I would feel like I was aping that gesture, which whereas I usually could find a way to make the gesture mine, but that was a gesture that was really hard. I think in the beginning of Your City's a Sucker is as close as, because I used the handheld cassette recorder that I was demoing the acoustic part for the beginning of it, but other than that, it's very, very alien to me.
Why don't we hear just the beginning of a certain tune. You once said you could listen to that intro for about an hour.
I was a very trancy kid.
That was the Beatles.
Yeah.
Tomorrow Never Knows, by the way.
Little known band called the Beatles. I was a really psychedelic little kid. I was very into. I didn't know that. I didn't know what that meant.
So how did you find out later on?
Well, I was really into physicality of music, and that to me was my favorite Beatles song always, because it wasn't cerebral. It wasn't like, and here's another chord change that is clever. It was just like this relentless kind of nodding thing, like this hypnotizing thing. And I was always really entranced with things that were really hypnotizing. I used to listen to humming machines, anything that was like kind of repetitive and loopy, like Chopin's Berceuse, like things that are like the lullabies and stuff like that. The things that are just like monotonous. When I found Can, I was like in heaven, because it just was like, here's this for 30 minutes. But that is the first song that I heard. No, it's a story. No, let's see.
Did you ever find yourself looping things up? Like, taking tapes and looping them up so you could listen to them actually on repeat?
Well, I only had a cassette recorder. And looping cassettes, I've done it, and it's really hard work, and you usually screw it up, and then it usually gets eaten by the car stereo. And so once you splice a cassette, it's just like, blah, and then you're like pulling it out of the car dash with a bunch of sadness. It wasn't the regular cassette decks that did that, it was the car ones, because you couldn't open they're in there, just gumming up the works. No, but my friend Brad got an emulator Emax sampler, and we would make things with that. And I had a drum machine as a kid and one synthesizer.
What was the drum machine?
Drum machine was a Roland 767, I think.
Do you still have it?
No. I always would give things to people to get them to make music too. And then I would forget who I gave it to. And I could remember the moment of giving it to people, and then it was as if there was like a blurry thing around their face. I could see myself being like, yeah, you should totally make a song. And then it's like, blah, 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 blah. Like the voice has changed like on a TV interview.
Like a Charlie Brown.
Yeah. Wah, 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 wah. And then I'm like, I don't even know what gender that is. So it went somewhere. This guy, Dan, who's in a band of mine, has my Korg. What is it? It's the Korg D800 or
Well, now you can remember who it is. But
Dan, that's one guy, but I don't know who has the drum machine.
Oh.
Damn it. But I would make loopy things on that.
Do you have a favorite drum machine?
I mean, probably the 808 or the 606, for different reasons. And the Wurlitzer Sideman.
Why the Wurlitzer Sideman?
The Wurlitzer Sideman has this incredibly deep kick drum that I use a sample of all the time. When you need something underneath that doesn't take up any space, it just makes you feel like the bottom dropped out. It's like adding subwoofers to something. And I really like that. Rather than making a too big of a kick drum, I can just slide the Sideman underneath.
Let's play one more and then open it up to questions.
Sure. I'll do what you tell me.
Good.
flying edit. This is the future. Sweet fader work.
It was Jump Into the Fire by Harry
Nilsson.
Was that the first record you guys covered as LCD?
It may very well be. I'm not 100% sure if it was either that or the Joy Division, the Warsaw No Love Lost.
It's an amazing song in the sense, to me, that it basically everything about it captures what LCD in my mind became.
Yes. It's and it is like a monotonous, kind of relentless song. Harry Nilsson might be a better singer. He is one of my all-time favorite singers with one of the most incredible voices, till John Lennon made him scream it out. True story. And it's so dumb and so good and so physical. It's like it's a blueprint, and it wasn't really like, I wasn't thinking about that at all when we started, and then I kind of refound the song because a friend of mine's band, this band Dung Beetle, was getting together to perform at a wedding. Again, they had been one of the most influential bands on me ever, and they couldn't find the drummer. He was working for FEMA or something, and so I sat in, and we were going to cover Jump Into the Fire, and I was just like, oh, that song's so good. So they did their song and they covered it, and then I was like, I'm going to do that too with my band. So it was, it's. I think it's a super powerful, super simple song. I mean, it works like a Stooges song in a way. It's like the same loop riff over and over.
Was it tough as a band to keep things simple, to not over-egg things when you were in the studio or writing songs? Or did it come naturally?
It was tougher for me to add things. I have a real hard time with too many elements. I really love sounds, and I think it's actually a weakness. I really do love individual sounds, and I fall in love with drum sounds and bass sounds, and then I get really annoyed when I finally mix a record. I'm like, this is really the last time I'm just going to hear this bass by itself. And there's so much in it, and I get really sad that I have to cover. Because there's a piano now, and it's all over the place. It's in the way, and I mute the bass, and the piano's great. Like, why don't I just have the piano? So I like individual sounds a lot. So I always get a bit stressed out when I cover things. So it's usually not a fear of, it's more that I have to let myself just put stuff in when it needs to be in there sometimes, and I have a harder time doing that than keeping it simple.
Let's open it up to questions from the audience.
Sure. I thought that's what you were asking me questions already. Just opening it up to public.
Yeah,
yes.
Basically.
Hi, everybody.
Does anyone have any questions for James Murphy?
If you don't, that's okay too. It's really, I don't have any questions for me.
Hi. Thank you so much for being here and talking with all of us. So it seems that in most moments in your day-to-day life, they appear to have no consequence on the rest of your life. But every now and then there's a moment that seems to change everything. So I was wondering, what's that moment for you that changed your musical life?
There's a lot of them, to be honest. Dating, back earlier, there's people too. There's moments and there's people. I was working with a guy who was making this music. I was just like sitting in on a session, and he was taking all these chances, and it wasn't very good. And I was really complaining about it a lot. Yeah, doing all this shit. He thinks he's so great. And then I realized, like, what was I doing? And I was like, okay, I'm that guy. I don't like this guy. If I make a movie and the me character doesn't make music and sits around and listens to records all the time and complains about other people, I'm like, I don't like that guy. That guy sucks. So I think it was this kind of a moment where I realized, like, maybe I'll just make things as opposed to just shut up. I didn't effectively shut up, but I did at least start making things, which was better. But there's a lot of things. I mean, there's a lot of nights out where my life was changed. There's a lot of waking up in the middle of the night. I remember I woke up in the middle of the night with like the least interesting revelation, which was after making the first record, the first LCD record. I woke up like 3 months before going to make the second record, Son of Silver, and I said, I got it. I just have to make the next record so much better. And when I said it, I was like, when I realized, I was like, that's not, this, it didn't mean anything, but to me it meant a lot. I really figured out something like that I could try and make things better. And rather than settling on an idea or something like that. It's a difficult, but yeah, I read Outliers, which is, people don't like, sometimes people don't like Malcolm Gladwell, but it's a really good book because it kind of woke me up to how many different people and how many different very, very lucky circumstances changed my life into making music. Whereas before you can believe this self-hype that like you worked really hard and everything, and you made this for yourself, but I'm very aware that that's not the whole truth. So it's more other people than moments, I think.
Any other questions?
You don't have to ask me a question, but you can. It doesn't have to be. There are no stupid questions. There are only stupid people. So you can... there's no stupid questions, only stupid answers.
There's...
right behind you.
Over there.
Don't be shy.
Hello.
Hello.
You were saying that there was that you didn't really get your success until a bit later in life, and I was wondering what kept you hanging in there throughout that period.
Limited options. I dropped out of college. I was in a shitty band, and what I knew how to do was run sound. I knew how to build sound systems and fix sound systems, and I was a live engineer for bands. That's how I made my money. How I made all the big money in the 90s. Working for $80 a night at Maxwell's in Hoboken or at Brownie's on Avenue A. And then sometimes I'd go on tour with the band, and that was just what I did. So I was just around music all the time. And I had a studio in Dumbo, which I paid $375 a month for, in that really fancy building where everything in Dumbo is. The building right by in Dumbo in Brooklyn, there's a building on waterfront, white and church. It's like this huge building, and I was the only tenant, and I had a little studio there, so I could make music. And every money, anything I'd ever earned went into equipment, so I was kind of stuck. It was like really, I didn't know what else I could do, and that was it.
Thanks. And was there a particular moment or some kind of changing factor that you noticed?
Yeah, I met I had been storing, I did this guy a favor in like 93. He moved to New York and had a bunch of studio equipment and didn't have any place to put it, so I let him store it in my studio, and he could use my studio once in a while if he wanted to. And I kind of forgot about it. And then when I got kicked out of my studio so that they could build luxury high-rises, I had to tell him that he got to take his stuff back. And he was like, well, I just got this space. And I was like, can I store my stuff in your space temporarily? And it turned out that, I always joke, it was like this, you get your chocolate on my peanut butter, your peanut butter on my chocolate. I was carrying all our equipment in there, and I was like, if you know a space I can build a new studio, let me know. And he's like, totally. And if you know somebody who can design a studio, because I want to build one here. I was like, well, we could just, I can do that here. And so that became DFA Studios, and that was a guy named Tyler Brody, who is one of those people without whom my whole situation doesn't exist, because he helped build the label and he helped build the studio and gave me a place to work. And then David Holmes, an artist from Northern Ireland, came and brought Tim Goldsworthy with him. And that was one of the first sessions that I did. And so I met Tim, who was my musical partner in the beginning of DFA. And I saw a whole different world that I'd never had any peek into, which was dance music. And that changed my life because I realized that making people dance had a point that had nothing to do with art. And I mean that in the most positive way, meaning that like it's like food. If they're not eating it, you've screwed it up. But if they're not dancing, you're just not doing a good job. So it made a very simple set of goals for me, which allowed me to calm down and stop wondering if what I was doing was good or worthwhile. I was like, I can figure this out and make people dance and make people have fun. And that was a great weight off your back after years of self-mythologizing of like, am I good? Am I as good? And people like, I can never be like David Bowie. I can never be like all these people. I'm never going to be in Velvet Underground. What am I? Who am I? Just silenced that voice for long enough for me to make some songs.
Were there any places in New York around that time that you were going to? I know you DJ'd at Plant Bar.
Yeah,
of course.
Mostly just Plant Bar. No, before Plant Bar was open, I was just going around with Marcus Lampkin, who's Shit Robot on DFA. He was the DJ. He used to be at Save the Robots, which was like a legendary after hours downtown club. And just going out and having fun, which was really anathematic to my like indie rock 90s, which is going out and being judgmental. It's like I paid $6 so I can stand here and be like, I prefer the Melvins. And then suddenly people were like hooking up with people and going home with people and having fun. And I was like, pretty sure I'm supposed to talk about Pavement by myself over here. And so I started loosening up a little bit, and it was the best, especially since I was like 29. It's a little late for loosening up, but it was all right.
There's hope for us all.
Get my dance on.
Are there any other questions?
Feel free. I can invent them. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
So you were talking about how you like listening to individual sounds, and you appreciate individual sounds, and then when you put them together, sometimes you feel sad because they lose something. So I'm wondering, how do you mix songs or create songs so you could still appreciate the individual characteristics of the sounds, or is that really just for you and not so much for the listeners?
Well, good query. I try to like not put too much stuff in, and I try also to leave gaps. Like usually in songs, that's one of the reasons I like intros and outros of songs. My songs are not very short typically. I don't get in and get out. I'm not nearly as obsessed with like melodies and hooks and things that you're supposed to be thinking about. So a lot of times it'll be like little elements in the beginning or breakdowns where like things can feature, so that I can feel satisfied that that there's something to dig into and look at. I mean, as a remixer, which is what I have done a lot in the past, I would sometimes get files and I would be stunned sometimes at what the individual sounds sounded like. Sometimes they were awful. Like they're just like, that's out of phase and it's clicking where all the edits are and this just sounds like shit. And you can hear the aliasing because you pitched it. And but then I listen to the record and I'm like, oh, it's a good record and people like it. It really jumps out at you. And that's just not me. Like I'm jealous sometimes of people who can do that. People who just like throw shit together and then the amalgam sounds good. I can't do that, or at least I can't do that now. But so I try instead to let things have their little lives, because intimacy is what gets me. Physicality and intimacy is what gets me. There's a Sly Stone song called "Just Like a Baby," and he's singing really, really close to the microphone, and it's that intimacy that really grabs me, more so than like like an epic structure sometimes just leaves me cold sometimes because I feel like a little bit manipulated in a different way. Like I feel like someone from way up here is small and they're manipulating me with something giant rather than someone coming close enough to me that they're at risk. And that's where that vulnerability and that intimacy comes from. Which I find in weird things like the Stooges. I feel the Stooges are really vulnerable and intimate, which doesn't necessarily what the first thing you think about. But if you listen to Penetrate Me and if you listen to like Penetration and you listen to like some of the vocals are so close and so weird, or Pop Tones by Public Image Limited when he's singing Drive Through the Forest in a Japanese car so small that it sounds like he's in your ear. Like these are things that just always gave me chills. So I try to work from that place, I guess, as often as possible. A very long-winded, nerdy answer.
Come to the right place.
.com.
Do you like everything on your label?
Wow. I guess it depends. I mean, at times, at some point, yes. But I also don't make all the decisions at my label. And I don't think every song that I've put out is successful as a creative endeavor. And I don't think every song that everybody's put out on DFA is successful. I don't think every song put out by the Beatles is a successful creative endeavor. But I also think what I like changes over time. There are songs I hated growing up that wind up being my favorite song on a record 20 years later. So it's my job is to support artists that I think do good work. And if sometimes what they do is not what I like, it's not my job. I'm not like an overlord. You know, it's like, it's not our job to think that we're right all the time. Because I think sometimes you're wrong, I'm wrong a lot of the time. Some things I like, I wind up looking back with thinking aren't so good. And some things I was kind of bored by and tossed off come back to me as later as stronger bits. So it's it's my job to like all the people that we put out. But it's not my job to go in and be like, gotta say, man, chorus on that, a little shaky. Because I would expect them to listen to me about as much as I would listen to somebody else, which is none.
I know it's a tough question, but was there anything in particular that you were excited to see as a live performance at the DFA show this past weekend?
There's almost nobody that I haven't seen. So I was in such a state of panic about really small things most of the night. Like, I didn't bring the person I told you I was going to bring, and it's their name at the door, so they can't get in. Can you just change it to a plus? Can you come down? Because I can't get in type texts. And the sound check didn't go well for this band, so I have to stand there and make sure it's okay type stuff. So I didn't get to rev up with my I was excited to see the Black Dice, and I didn't. I'll say what I was excited to see and didn't see, which is a bunch of stuff, because I was running around trying to be like Julia McCoy on Love Boat. Hey, everybody, is everybody okay over here? Cool. You can't get drinks? Hold on, let me try to figure that out. Which is a lot of what happens when we have events, is there's a lot of me just kind of feeling like, the mother of the bride at a wedding, making sure everybody's sitting at the right table. So I did get to see the band I got to see the most of were Planning to Rock and Prinzhorn, and I haven't seen either one in a very long time, so I was really excited to see them, and they were great. So, but everybody else I see all the time, like Marcus, I don't need to see him. He's staying at my house. I don't care.
That's fair. Any other questions? Uh-oh.
What's the thing with Black Dice? I mean, I love them, but I don't know how to make the question, but it's like they are different from a bunch of other...
Yes.
Well, you can answer now, I think.
What's the deal with Black Dice?
What is the deal with Black Dice?
Well, when we started off the label, we were pretty excited about music. And we liked not we liked the history of like downtown art music, and didn't necessarily want to just only do what people had associated us with. And one of the first bands I went and saw, the Black Dice, my friend Justin Chernow, who's the guy who brought me to see the Rapture, also brought me to see the Black Dice. And I freaked out. I thought they were awesome. And John Galkin became completely obsessed with the album they were working on.
What was their live show like? I mean, why was it
when I first saw them,
yeah,
it was like a fist fight. Like it was pure adrenaline and aggression, and people were getting their heads cut open, and it was just crazy. But it was like, it was really physical, and I'm a physical music person. And then they changed dramatically. They started making quite beautiful.
That was the first album, right?
But before
on
the first
DFA.
album, they were like...
Well, I'm saying
yeah.
on DFA. Yeah.
Well, then they started making... We had a big show with Black Dice and Rapture and a partially formed Juan McLean at this place called Warsaw in Brooklyn in April 2000, I think. Maybe 2001. I'm not exactly sure. Maybe 2000, 2001. And Black Dice played, and we were all out of our minds. And we had this video projector that had insanely slow motion skier going down a mountain, just like frame. And they played for like an hour to thousands of people, like at least 600 people over capacity in this room. And I called this PA company and I said, I want to get, there's a place that holds 800 people. And they're like, okay, well you need, and it has a PA in it already. I said, well, for that size, we would suggest 2 of these columns. And I was like, we'll take 4. So we made a surround sound system, and it was just the most insanely punishing, but beautiful, like orchestral. They were just a different side of our taste, you know, and we wanted to just, when we liked something, we wanted to put it out rather than try and find a niche market and exploit that market. And in fact, we didn't put out a lot of music that was sent to us that fit, because you could feel people trying to be like, well, here's what they make, let's send them that. We weren't that interested. It was always like, I mean, Planning to Rock is pretty unrelated. Prince-Horn Dance School is pretty different.
Larry Gus,
Shocking Pinks, and Sing Conga. You know, there's like Invisible Conga people. There's, I think, some diversity, but we're quite known for a certain thing, and certainly a Black Dice show at times would be very far from what we would be assumed to be about. But I don't know. We liked it. I don't care. It was just fun. It was funny. That was our first full-length album, which was very confusing for dance stores. Was that Beaches and Canyons by Black Dice was our first full-length album, and we had been doing well with 12 inches, and a lot of dance stores were late to buying DFA records, so they were like, well, here's an album, we'll take that.
Well, and it's also, if you knew Black Dice back then, you were like, well, what the hell is this?
Yeah. Yeah, but there was a big change for them, too. Like, their sound changed dramatically, so people who were really into Black Dice were
So you really marketed that well, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's, you know.
Giving it to dance stores.
We made
Black
the big
Dice
money.
Fans weren't
Well, we
confused.
purposely didn't tell people what it was going to be like. We thought that was funny. Most of our decisions were based on that. That'd be funny. I'm very big fan of the aesthetic value of like a small personal joke brought writ large. I really am. Like, some of my favorite things are just like, oh, let's just do that. Well, okay, no, let's just genuinely do that.
This was you, when you were recording This Is Happening, deciding to wear all white all the time.
Yeah, or anything like that. Or even just DFA, like sitting and being like, what if I made a little shitty lightning bolt? All right, let's just use that. We could hire a company to like make it look nice. Nah, first time I scribbled it, that's the lightning bolt for DFA forever. Like in a meeting with Tim being like, well, what if it looked like that? And it said DFA in it. There's no cross on the A because the ballpoint didn't work. That's just it forever. And I love that stuff. And we have that framed. That's framed. It's on a scribble piece of paper. And I remember John got it scanned, drum scanned really high quality by a high fancy art scanner. And they cut off a piece of tape. And John was like, are you out of your mind? It's a piece of art. You've destroyed it. And they felt really terrible, so they gave it to us for free. We were really broke then, so it worked out.
Are there any other questions?
Uh-oh. Just fight
Starting
it out.
to pick up.
Deathmatch.
Hi there.
Hi.
Yeah, it seems like kind of a tough time for larger indie labels, I guess, like DFA, to kind of survive in the music industry at the moment.
I will take the compliment of larger indie label. Thank you.
And then maybe mostly smaller boutique labels are kind of thriving, and I'm just curious what your plan is to survive going forward.
We're diversifying on a global. No, we have no. We have no plan. I mean, there's two people that work there: John, who's one of the partners, and Chris, and interns. And there's no plan. It's it's barely guerrilla warfare. The plan is to keep putting out records until someone shows up and says we can't. I know. I think to a certain degree it is. I mean, we've had interesting experiences with like working with major labels and stuff. Which was, when we got the Black Dice album was a major label release. That was on EMI worldwide. Which I think was a part of the joke. John and I were like, check this out. Amazing. Like, that was a major label album. And we, but I don't know what our plan is. Our plan is to not spend a lot of money, keep it cheap, not have expensive overhead, and put out records we like in whatever way we can. And Chris Peterson, who's I like in the documentary, he says, I think I'm the assistant label manager. He's really young. He's younger than John and I and less grumpy. So he does things like put things on the internet to sell. Because we just have rooms full of shit. Like we just have there's 300 boxes of mugs that we made. And then John and I will be like, yeah, we're totally going to get on that at some point. But Chris will be like, I'm going to put them on the internet and we'll sell them. So I think Chris keeps us alive by selling mugs. It's not a good business. I'm just going to tell you right now, it's not a good business. If you would like to make a lot of money, do something else. You may make a lot of money, but if you'd like to make a lot of money, get into financial management. Money makes money. But we always have just done this because we really liked it. So, and all of us have tried to figure out ways to make money, make a living outside of the label so that we're not a burden on the label. Except for poor John, because he works like 20 hours a day, so he's stuck in the office. Sorry, John.
Thanks.
I'm sure he won't have time to see this.
I thought I would have a better.
Yeah, that was really.
I thought I'd
not
have a
inspiring.
more positive answer. Sorry, I realize that's really shitty.
Hi. You said you like intimacy and physicality in music, and you both do DJ sets and also perform with a band. I want to know what do you think or feel from the performance point of view and also from the spectator point of view of the different type of shows. If you feel more connected to some or...
Well, I'd argue that one's a show and one's not a show. I think the band is a show. And the DJ gig is not a show, and I dislike it when it is a show. I don't like DJing as a show. For me, I'm a DJ. I'm at the party. I'm playing music, but the people dancing is the primary function. The people and the crowd. When I go see a band, I want the band to be there in a completely different way than a DJ. I've had great experiences in both. I've had, I think. The assumption would be that like the band is much more satisfying, but that's not necessarily true for me. I've had an equal number of kind of really heartfelt, really personal and really great experiences DJing, and I've had a ton of soul crushing. Why am I doing this? Live gigs. In contrast, they're so different. That I have a difficult time actually comparing them. They're as different as being in the studio, which is not performing at all, is from either one. They form a triangle to me. I loved being in a band. I loved the people that I played with. I hated the monstrous weight of everything, physical and emotional. I hated having trucks and buses and a large staff. I mean, I liked all the people, but it just like there's a lot about not making music that goes into being in a band unless you have a management team that takes that away from you. But I feel the way I am is not, I'm not well designed for that. I feel I have to be engaged in everything. Otherwise it gets away from me and it becomes something else, which is no judgment to people who do that, but it's just not my way. DJing, when it's, I don't like DJing on a stage. I like to DJ in a booth. I like to just provide a good party for people. And I've seriously had times where like I'm happier than I've ever, like as happy as I can be DJing. But it's a different kind of intimacy. Sometimes it depends. It's up to the crowd to a certain degree as well. Whether they'll let the weight of their expectation of what the event is supposed to be like interfere with their experience. If I have a long DJ set, if I do big festivals and there's a long DJ set and it's a lot of like banging electronic dance music, I tend to be very boring for a little while because I want people to just stop looking at me and to stop waiting for the thing to do this too. Because I feel like a certain amount of excitement becomes tedious. It's like spice. If it's just everything's got a million chilies in it, you just get numb. And I feel people sometimes follow into their expectations. Like, I'm supposed to do this now. I'm supposed to look at this guy who's going to put his arms up and I'm going to put my arms up. And then he's going to drop everything out. It's going to rumble along. He's going to put it all back in. It's going to be incredible. But they don't feel like it's incredible necessarily. They sometimes don't just disconnect and they just go through the motions. So I try to be boring enough that they realize that I'm not going to be trying to make them do that. And then hopefully start playing some stuff that feels really good and maybe people will have a different kind of time. But that's a whole nother endless subject, I guess.
Thanks.
Cool. Well, James will be around a little bit while we're here, so feel free to ask a question. But for now,
I will.
Thank you.
Be here? Right here.
Well, around.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay.
Man, I'm open to this. Didn't know if I was going to be on this couch. Or...
You can do whatever you want to do.
It's not.
It's your world,
It's not
James.
really true.
Within
Police.
reason.
Yeah, it's a police state.
On that inspiring note, James Murphy.